Hello and welcome to another video. Today is a little bit different. I've gotten a couple questions on my videos about markers and blending and paper and stuff, and so this is just pretty much a very basic introduction to markers, like super basic. If you want stuff that's like super in-depth and like professional quality, there are other artists on YouTube that have done marker videos who are much more experienced than I am and actually do art as like a profession. But if you're just like a little guy and you just want to learn markers really quick, really fast, then you can go ahead and watch this video. Like I said, I'm not like a professional artist or anything. I just do this as a hobby. So if you want to know how to use markers in like a hobby sort of way, I guess you could watch this. Anyway, the very first thing you should know about markers is actually starting before the markers. Is actually the paper. So there are lots of different types of paper, obviously. So if you would like to get into markers, typically the type of paper that I like to use is a smoother paper. It could be thick, it can be thin, but I'll tell you the what's it called? The pros and cons for both thick and thin types of paper. Typically I just prefer smoother types of paper because it is a little bit easier to blend on it, and also if it's like more of like a rougher paper, I find that it can chew up the tips of your marker a little bit faster than you would like. I do like to use my markers and I would like to use them for a long time, and I personally do like to use Copic markers, so they do sell replacement nibs for those, but if you're using like a cheaper brand of markers that doesn't come with replacement nibs, I feel like it would be better to use a smoother paper. That way you're not like chewing up your markers before they run out of ink, because then that would be like a waste of money, you know? And just before I go any further, just know that all of these things are like just friendly advice. Like none of this is set in stone. You can do whatever you want. If you're like, I like to use my markers on rougher paper, I'm never gonna be like, oh, you can't do that, that's bad, right? That's your prerogative. This is just some stuff that I've learned along the way that I feel like is easier for my process, and so maybe you guys will find it a little bit useful for you. So after moving on from the texture of the paper, we can move on to the thickness of the paper. And now when it comes to thickness of the paper, honestly and truly, this is pretty much going to be up to preference. There's lots of marker artists that will swear by thinner paper for marker art, and there's lots of marker artists that use thicker paper for marker art. It's really just up to you and what you want. I'll just let you know though the pros and cons for each. Typically me, I tend to lean more towards a thicker piece of paper, just because, well, I like the feel of it in my hand a lot, and also I feel like I'm better able to achieve results that I like with thicker paper, because since the paper is thicker / heavier or whatever, I feel like you get a lot more time to work with it, and there's a lot less bleed on thicker paper, just because since the paper is thicker, it takes a little bit longer and a little bit more ink to actually super saturate the paper, and so since it takes more ink, it doesn't spread out as much, and that's how I feel about it anyway. I'll show you some examples. Okay, so as you can see, this is a sketchbook. It's got pretty thick paper. This is not the thickest actually, but it's pretty thick in comparison to some other sketchbooks that I have. This is in a Hoo marker pad. This is in the 8.5 by 11 size. And so it's got pretty good blending. But when it comes to like this paper, when you're drawing on it, right, you put a line down, right, and it'll pretty much stay there. It doesn't really feather out too much, which is what I like, which is typically why I like to use a thicker paper. But like I was saying before, it does take a little bit more ink to really blend the colors together. Like you can even see here, like this is the part where I laid it down, and I did go over and try to blend it out, but that line where I laid it down is still pretty defined right there. And that's because it takes a little bit more to saturate this. I could have spent a lot of time super soaking in marker ink and got it just a little bit more of a seamless blend, but that's a seamless sort of blend is not super definitive of my own personal style. If that's something that you really want, you're like, I really want those gradients, I really want it to be like super beautiful gradient, like you can't even tell that these were two different markers, like that sort of gradient, I would probably go with a thinner paper. And I'll show you a little bit why it would be better to use a thinner paper, but yeah. This is a thicker paper, and this is typically the type that I like to use. Okay, so this is a thinner sort of paper. This is the Lita Art Supply sketchbook. I like these ones personally for marker work. We're not really looking at these guys currently because I didn't really do a lot of blending. We're actually looking towards this guy right here. So sorry if it is a little bit hard to see, but this one kind of has a little bit more of a seamless blend in comparison to the other one. Like this red and this red, I'm sorry, this is hard for you guys to see, but when I try to zoom up close, it kind of loses the color. But yeah, this red and this red are actually two different reds. They're pretty similar in tone, but it's kind of hard to see where they actually are different. And that is sort of kind of what I like about this sketchbook, is the blends are a little bit more seamless, like this to this, right? You can kind of not really even see where I did it. There are some parts where you can. That's because I got a little bit lazy on this one. If I spent a little bit more time, it would have blended a little bit more seamlessly, and it would have been a little bit easier just because this paper has a little bit more bleed to it, both through the paper and on the paper. It does feather a little bit more. If you really want seamless blended looks, thin paper is probably more for you, just because, like I said, it does bleed, and that bleed helps you when it comes to blending your markers. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of super blended looks. Like these ones are not super blended. I just needed that one for this one because I wanted that glowing look right there. And so like that blend was really important for me there. So yeah. So that's what the difference is really between thick paper and thin paper when it comes to marker art. But no matter what paper you're going to use, it's gonna have bleed onto the back. You can see with that one, there's some bleed there. And also for this guy, there is also bleed on this one. And there's quite a lot of bleed. That's gonna go with pretty much every sketchbook that you get. If you're trying to use alcohol markers, you're gonna bleed through the back of the paper. There's only 2 brands so far that I know of that have a bleed-proof type of paper that's very specific. It's the Crescent Render paper, no show-through paper, and then I think Ohuhu currently has 2 versions of a sketchbook that are no show-through paper. I can't really speak on the Ohuhu ones. I haven't tried them, but I do have a couple of Crescent Render ones, so I can show you guys some of the art in there when it comes to alcohol markers. So this is a Crescent Render sketchbook. This is an 8.5 by 11. They do come in other sizes. They're actually getting a lot harder to find. I don't know why. I don't know if they're out of business, or if maybe they're just going through a restock currently and it's taking them a while to fill up stock. I don't know. It's got a little bit harder to find them. I believe Ohuhu probably might be the ones that might be a little bit easier to find currently, but like I said, I have not tested those papers, so I can't really speak to their quality. I've heard good things, but that's like word of mouth stuff. I can't really speak to it personally. But for the Crescent Render no show through paper, it really does not bleed show through. I will show you right now. So these are a couple of marker drawings that I did. These are the same markers that I've used in my other sketchbooks. And then you can just see here on the flip side, there's nothing to see, right? And so these ones are really good if you really don't want your markers to bleed through the other side. They really don't bleed unless you're like super going over it super a lot, a bunch, like a lot. It takes a lot of blending to make this bleed through the back. I personally have not made it bleed through the back ever, just because I don't have like a super heavy blending style. But I've seen some artists that were like super heavy-handed, and they did make it bleed through the back, and I was like, wow, I didn't even think that it could do that. So it can, if you really go ham on it. But I feel like most people don't really super go ham with their markers, so that probably will not be a problem for you, as long as you're like a little light-handed. I do think these for me personally, when I use these, I don't think that they blend quite as well as other papers. It is a thicker paper. I think it has to be just for the no show through thing to work. I'm not sure. And so it's a little bit harder to blend. And then also it does, for darker colors, it does have this speckling that I sort of kind of hate. So I don't really use markers a lot in here, which is kind of funny to say, because like that's the whole point. I do use this for markers, but not as much as I probably should. Yeah, I just don't really like the speckling, especially on darker colors. It's just not my thing. I do like darker skinned characters, to draw darker skinned characters, so that kind of is like a buzzkill for me. And so if speckling for paper bothers you, I would just keep that in mind. But if you don't care about that sort of thing, and you're like, I don't really do heavy blends, I just feel like I have trouble blending on this paper. I feel like it doesn't blend in the way that I like. And so this is a little bit more of a, what's it called? A little bit more of a cell shaded style, but I still think it looks cute. And so yeah, if you're like, I like a more cell shaded look for markers, but I hate when it bleeds through the paper, maybe the Crescent Render would be good for you. I don't know about the Ohuhu one. Like I said, I can't speak on it. But if it's anything like this, I would probably say the same things about it. But yeah, so this is great paper if you don't like bleed through. I don't know if I have any ones that are like a little bit more heavily. This is another one, and as you can see, it doesn't bleed through at all. And I have another one, this one right here, and then there's no bleed through on the back. Like, this is not from that drawing, this is from the paper, because this is actually a watercolor and I closed the sketchbook too soon. That's not bleed, so. And then I think I have one more. This is also markers, but like I said, no bleed through there either. I did a couple. This is very simple though. There was no bleed through there. And then I have one that was a little bit more complex, a little bit more blended, I believe. Sorry, it's taking me a while. This is also marker, and as you can see, no bleed at all. And then I had one more that I wanted to show you guys. This one. Yeah, I did a little bit more heavy-handed stuff in here, and then boop, no bleed through at all. So yeah, if you really don't want marker bleed on your sketchbooks, I recommend the Crescent Render. If you really hate bleed through, which I don't, I actually really like bleed through. I like to look at it from the flip side because I think it looks kind of cool. But if you're a person who's like, I hate that, and you can't really afford one of these no show through sketchbooks because they are a little bit more expensive than like a regular sketchbook you get from like the dollar store or whatever, I would just go ahead and maybe start like drawing, like do your little marker thing, and then like cut and paste out things that you want to go on the flip side. If you really hate looking at it, unfortunately there's really no solution except for these no show through papers. So yeah, if you're like, I really hate marker bleed, I would just start covering it up. You could use paints on the other side and that would cover it up. But yeah, there's really no solution to that except for no show through papers. So sorry if that is disappointing news to you, but that's just kind of the reality of working with alcohol markers. But yeah, now that we're moving through the types of paper that you can use with markers, we can go into actually using our markers. So this is a piece of cardstock. I typically, when I print things out, I like to use cardstock for my marker drawings. This is not my favorite cardstock that I've ever used. I actually don't really like it that much, but I bought a shit ton of it, so I have to use it. It's a little bit more textured than I like, so yeah, not my favorite, but I still feel like it works pretty well for alcohol markers. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate some things for you guys. First and foremost, when it comes to making a flat color in markers, this is not exactly hard. It's just that I feel like maybe people want to use an alcohol marker the same way that they use like a watercolor marker, and I would just say no, don't go in with that sort of mind, just because there are different types of marker, and if you kind of go in all willy-nilly with an alcohol marker, you're gonna get streaks. Maybe you like streaks, maybe that's your thing. If you like streaky markers, that's cool, that's chill. I am not going to be teaching you how to make your marker streaky just because I feel like that's like the easiest thing to do is to make it streaky, unless it's like a super special technique that you have. If you do, that's cool, that's chill. I'm just gonna teach you how to get flat colors first and foremost, just because like I feel like when I started doing markers, that was the hardest for me. And so your initial thought process when coloring markers might just be go like that, right? Don't do that if you want a flat color, okay? Just because you look at this and then you go in a different direction and you're like filling it in and you're like, ah, yes, this is how you color with markers, right? And then you're like, I'm gonna fill up the whole thing. And you get this part and you're like, why isn't that flat and nice and cool looking? And it's because, no offense, but yeah, no, that's not gonna work. That's not gonna work. And also, I would just go ahead and make sure that your markers are full of ink. If your marker is dry, it's gonna be harder to get a flat color because the alcohol ink is like a smooth bedding for alcohol ink is sort of kind of predicated on how much ink you are using. If you really want a smooth look, you need a lot of ink. Like you need to saturate that paper, right? Which is what part of the problem is with just going streaky, like back and forth like that. You're not really saturating the paper. You're just putting a light layer down, and that's what's giving you those streaks, right? So if you want a really smooth look with alcohol markers, you're gonna need to make sure that your marker has a good amount of ink in it. And even if it doesn't, and you're like, it only has a limited amount of ink, but I just want to color something really quick and just fill it up, it's only a small space and I have a limited amount of markers, you can do it, but it's you're gonna have to move slow and really saturate the paper, and I'll show you that right now. Okay, so once you're sure that your marker is nice and I hate the word juicy, but full of ink, I will say, this is what you're gonna want to do if you want a nice flat color. This is not gradients currently. This is not blending. This is if you want a nice flat color, right? You're like, yeah, we'll move on to blending in a second, but this is for just a flat color. Like you're like, I just want to fill this one spot with alcohol ink. I don't want to blend anything. I just want a flat color. This is typically what I would do. There are two sides to an alcohol marker. Typically, there is a chisel side, and if you do not have a marker with a brush side like a Copic, there will typically be a bullet side. And if you're going to be doing just like a flat color, I would typically go ahead and use the chisel side just because it distributes more ink, and if you want a flat color, you're going to want more ink. The brush side is good for blending And you can get a flat color with a brush side. It just takes a little bit more work and it distributes a little bit less ink, so it's going to take a little bit longer also if you want to do it that way. And then for a bullet nib, listen, I hate bullet nibs. I hate bullet nibs currently, not currently, personally, I hate them. I don't like them at all. They're good for filling in small little areas, but they're not great for blending. And then they're also not great for flat color just because they're so small and they let out a little bit of ink at a time. So they're not my thing. I don't know how to teach you how to blend with those. I don't like them, so I haven't used them. If you want to see someone who actually really likes bullet nibs and does really good work with them, I would recommend Sophia Lou's channel. Her art is beautiful and she prefers bullet nibs for her alcohol markers. It couldn't be me, not my thing, but her art is great. So if you want to learn how to use bullet nibs, I would go to her. I'm not the one for that. But anyway, a flat look for alcohol markers. So typically what I do is I really want to soak the paper in the ink. And so you can go different directions, but I do prefer this like sort of circular motion just because it really gets like all of the paper and it gets it a little bit more saturated. And that's typically what I like, is a more of a saturated look. And I'm just leaving the other parts I'm just leaving this one so that way you guys can see the difference. And as you can see, it's taking me a little bit longer to do it just because I'm really making sure that I'm really soaking the paper with ink so I can get a nice flat look. And you are going to want to kind of move a little bit fast, like not as fast as when I did the other one, just because that's how you get streaks, but a little bit faster, a little bit fast just in general. And if you see some parts that you think are coming out streaky, you can just go ahead and go over them again, just because as long as the ink is still wet, it will still create a seamless blend, right? If the ink has dried, it won't be as seamless as a blend, but if the ink is wet, that's when you get sort of more of a seamless blend. And as you saw, I did gonna stop going in the circles and then start going like this. This also works. I typically tend to prefer the circles, and then when I get to the corners, I really don't do it. But the circles are gonna help you get a little bit more ink in there, and it's gonna be super saturated. As you can see, this paper does have some bleed on it, and especially because I was putting in a lot more ink. If you're really trying to like really get flat looks or blending with your markers, you're gonna use more ink. Like I said, this paper is a little bit on the thinner side. It's not exactly thin, but it's thinner than my thicker alcohol marker paper that I use. And so it does feather a little bit more. But as you can see in comparison, this is a nice flat wash, and this one is streaky. And also it's actually closer to the color that's on the cap and the true color of the ink, just because that's how you're supposed to use it. You're really supposed to saturate it in there. So yeah, that's how you get a nice flat look with markers. All right. And now that we've gotten our flat layer, we can move on to blending. Hooray! When it comes to blending alcohol markers, I am not the best at that. I'm going to be honest with you guys right now. But it's pretty much the same sort of principle as blending, as creating a flat layer with markers. It's kind of the same thing, except you can use like 3 markers or 2 markers or however many markers you want to use to create that sort of clean blended look. So when it comes to alcohol markers, you're going to want to use a light color, a mid-tone, and then a dark color. You can blend 2 light colors together. I'll show you right now, actually. I'll show you 2 light colors. Okay, for our first practice for blending, we're going to be using B000 and G000. These ones are going to be pretty easy to blend because not only are they both cool colors, they're also both the same value. So it's going to be a little bit easier to blend these. So let's start with the green one. And typically when I do blending, I like to have both of the markers uncapped. 1, just because you have to move kind of fast. And 2, it's a pain in the ass when you're like, I gotta blend it real quick, and then the cap is undone, you know? So we're gonna start with the green one. We'll just do the same thing that we did before. We're really gonna saturate the paper with it. And we'll go about halfway through, like we did before. It's gonna really saturate it here, and this is just a 2-color blend. I'll show you 3 colors in a second. And you're just gonna, like I said before, really make sure that your marker is like got a super a good amount of ink in it, so that way you can get the more seamless blends. Okay, and then when you make sure that this is still wet, if you come back when it's dry, it's not gonna blend as well. Just because markers are a wet medium, they blend best when you work wet on wet. You can get some blending if it has already dried, but it's not going to be as good as if you had done it when it was wet. And there you go. There's our nice blend. Look at that. You see how nice and just like a very, very good, very cute gradient. Like I said, that was pretty easy just because these were not only the same color family, but they're also the same tone. It's going to get a little bit harder, not tone, sorry, when they're the same value. It's going to get a little harder when you do different values, just because there's something that can happen if you like do different values that are too different for two-tone markers, especially if you end up putting like a light color over a dark color, it tends to start to lighten the color like a lot, and like a way that I personally don't like. If that's the effect that you're going for, that's cool, that's chill. But personally, I don't like the way that it looks. I will give you guys an example. Just give me 1 second. We're gonna go ahead and use E00 and E99. I would never personally try to blend these colors, and I'll show you why. I just feel like they're much too different in value. Putting the E99 over the E00 is not going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem when I put the E00 over the E99. I'm also going to go ahead and be using these colors to demonstrate this sort of kind of rule when it comes to alcohol markers. It's not really a rule per se. It's sort of kind of just advice about blending light to dark for alcohol markers. That's typically what I tend to do. Just because I like to avoid this sort of effect that you're going to see here after I go over this one. But yeah, it's just typically they tell you to blend light to dark for markers, just because with markers you can always add more color, but you can't take color away just because they are like a permanent medium, I guess. It's not like watercolor where if you put enough water it's going to lift. You can get it to lift, but it's going to have this effect, and I'm about to show you that right now. Finish this part. We got that nice and saturated, and now we're gonna switch over to this guy. And as you can see, it's starting to lift it up. I typically, and personally, I don't like this look. It's not a seamless blend, and it's lifting the color a lot in a way that's sort of kind of gross. I personally don't like it. If you like it, that's more power to you. You can get some cool effects with this. Like if you draw like a black background and you decide that you want to have like stars, you can go over with like a colorless blender and you can lighten the black spots and it could look a little bit closer to stars, like this really white spots. But yeah, this is not the vibe. Personally, for me, as you can see, it's not a seamless blend because they are so different in value. So I would just typically avoid colors that are too far apart in value, or else you get blends that look like this. That's of course if you're doing a 2-color blend. If you're doing a 3-color blend, it's a little bit easier because you can have a dark value and you have your mid-tone in the center and then you have your light color, and so the mid-tone color is like a bridge in between the lighter color and the darker color, and that'll make it more of a seamless blend, which I will demonstrate now. You guys might be wondering, since I did say it was a little bit better to blend light to dark, if I had done these in reverse order, would the blend have been a little bit more seamless? The answer is no. They're still too far apart in value, so they really wouldn't have had a seamless blend. But that was a good question. All right. For our 3 version of the blending, we're going to use E99, E13, and E21. These ones are closer in value, so the blending should be a little bit better, but a lot better than that one though. But yeah, I got rid of the E00 because it's so, they're literally like the whole spectrum apart. For Copic markers, like this is the darkest brown you can get, or the darkest, the most saturated, I guess, for Copics, and then the E00, that's the lightest you can get. So these were never gonna blend, and I would never ever blend them together for like the same like picture, like for the same skin tone. It's like way too different in value. So these are actually more similar to like a realistic skin tone that I would use. And these little bars are really good for practice. If you're like, I'm not really good at blending, I would just go ahead and experiment with whatever colors you have and just go ahead and like do as many gradients as you think will fill in here. Like you could do 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, as long as you just make the sections small enough. And I think they're good practice. I used to do these a lot when I first started markers. I don't really do them as much now, just because I'm a little bit more familiar with my markers. So I'm like, I feel like I don't really need to do them, but they can be good to do. And then if you still feel like your blend is not super seamless, you can always go over it again with the other marker. Like I said, it's better to do like light to dark, but you can always go over it again if you're feeling like it's not coming out the way that you want it to. Like this part, I'm like, this part could be blended a little bit more, and so I could go over it a little bit with this one, and that will have that lighting effect. But since they're closer in value, it's not going to be as stark as the other one. It's not going to be as bad. Oh, sorry, it's shaking. And this one honestly is still kind of far in value from the other ones, but that's okay. And I'll just go over it again with this guy to get a little bit more of a blend. And there you go. Honestly, it's still not super seamless, but as you can see, it's a lot more blended than this guy, because that guy's crazy. Sorry, that's just silly. But yeah, as you can see, they're a little bit closer in value, so the blend is a little bit more seamless. I mean, you're not really gonna get this super seamless blend unless you're using like colors that are the same value. At least in my experience, maybe more seasoned artists are better at that than I am. Like I said, I'm just a hobbyist, so I do my best. That's our 3 marker blend there. And you can blend colors that are not in the same color family. I will show you that right now. We're gonna go ahead and use this R000, and we're gonna go back to the blue 000. As you can see, this is red. Technically, it's pink, but blue and pink are on opposite sides of the color wheel. So I'll just go ahead and demonstrate that for you guys. They are different colors, but they are the same value, so the blending should not be too bad on this. And if you ever feel like you don't want to do these little bars, I would also recommend doing these circles, so that way you can practice shadows with markers. I don't know if I'm going to get to doing those in this video, but that's what I brought them out for, was to show you guys that. But yeah, that's what the circle's for, if you ever want to like practice lighting with your markers, and also what's it called, blending on like a spherical sort of shape, so that way it is a little bit more realistic, because doing these bars is good for blending practice. But I mean, how often are you going to be blending rectangles, right? You're going to be more likely blending like people, putting out your markers for people, or drawings of buildings and stuff like that. And so those little balls are really good for practicing shading and how to do blending with shading. So yeah, that's what those were for. I don't know if I'm going to get to that, but we might. This video is already getting like kind of long though, so I'm not sure. I'm just gonna really saturate that paper, especially on the edge where you want it to blend. I would really make sure that that part is like super saturated with ink, because that's how you're gonna get that blend that you want. Yeah. If you want to like sort of kind of loosen up towards the edges, you can. That's also a technique. If you're like, I want the edges to be lighter, you can just ease up on the ink and it won't be as dark. Like I said, you're getting more of the sort of, the marker gets darker the more saturated you make it. So if you're like, I really want it to be super light, you just ease up on the pressure and the amount of ink you're putting in there, and it will be a little bit lighter. Ta-da! And there you go. That is the blend between the red and the blue, or the pink and the blue. As you can see, since they are part of a different color family, the blend is not as seamless as this one. Like I said, these ones are the same color family, so there is blue and green, and so it's a little bit more seamless here. This is still a very good gradient, because like I said, they are the same value, and so yeah, it's still pretty good. So I think that's all I have to share with you guys. I guess we can do one of the balls just so that way you can kind of see what I'm coming out with that one. I hate to have printed out the balls and I didn't even get to show you how to use them. We're just gonna make this little ball yellow just for fun. And so typically when I color something, I lay down first the lightest color that I'm gonna use, which is gonna be this Y13. And I put that over the whole thing. And if you want to leave space for like a highlight, you can. Since this is like a ball, I want the light source to be coming from the top, what's it called, the top left. And so I'm gonna leave a white space there. And I'm just gonna color in the whole thing with this yellow color. Just make sure it's super saturated. I really should have filled this up before I started doing this. But I thought I had filled it up before. I guess I did use it and I wasn't even thinking about it. That's why it was on my desk. Anyway, that's fine. This one is not going to come out super great because I don't actually have a refill for this one. I've been filling up my markers just because I use them so often. As you can see, I'm running out of ink here. So the blend on this is not going to be the best. So you know what we're actually going to do? We're going to switch and we're going to save this. So if you're ever in this position where your marker is out of ink and you're like, I still want to blend, we're going to switch over. This is going to be our darkest shadow, which is Y38. As you can see, it's like super, super different. Unfortunately, the blend is not going to be as good as it would have been if I had had a lot of ink in my lightest color, but that's okay. We're going to save this by using our best friend, the mid-tone color. Honestly, the mid-tone color will genuinely save your life a lot. As you can see, it blends really well with the darker color. It's not going to blend super, super well with the lighter color just because I'm out of ink on that one. It would have been a lot better if it had ink in it, but it doesn't. But that's okay. We can still do our best to blend it out. And you see, that's the importance of making sure your markers have a lot of ink or even just are filled up at all. This one's empty because I just used it for something else. So it's like super empty and I forgot to buy a refill for it. But the blending on that is still not too bad. See, you get a nice and blended. And that way you can practice blending your markers on like actual shapes and not like these little bars. Because as much as I love the little bars, they're not exactly practical. But the circles are a little bit more practical than the little bars. And that's our little sphere, you guys. And you could do blending with even more colors, and you don't even have to do them with like the same color family. Like if I wanted, I could do this with orange, or I could do it with blue even. But I just kept it simple. This is the basics, you know? And so yeah, I hope that this was helpful for you guys. If you have any more questions, you can leave them in the comments and I might make a follow-up video if this was like hard to understand. I hope it wasn't. I feel like this is sort of the kind of stuff that I would have liked to know when I was starting markers. And so I hope that this was helpful. Learn the type of paper, how to make flat colors, how to do a little bit of blending. So yeah, I'll go ahead and see you guys in the next video. Thank you for spending this time with me. Bye.